I've been following Gilad's work for a number of years because he does these really interesting projects with his students. So in his social psychology class with his MSc students, and he's also made a network of early careers researchers who he supports doing these kinds of things, and they are replications. So really proper scale replications that he puts for people to replicate social psychology, but also decision-making research and things like that. So today he's going to talk to us a little bit about both of those things, both the research and how to do replications, but add extensions to make them a little bit more attractive for journals and publication, things like that, but also just the real value of using undergraduate students' time, which they have to spend on research anyway, in this really worthwhile pursuit of replication and adding robustness to our science. So thank you, Gilad. Thanks very much for coming along, and I really look forward to this. If everybody would like to put questions in the chat, you can tell me whether you want to ask your question in person at the end, or if you would prefer that I ask it on your behalf, if you just put the note like that. Then we'll just start now. Okay, I'm going to record as well, just to let you know, in case you weren't aware. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Gilad.
Thank you. It's a real treat for me to be able to talk to you and present to you some of our work. I, on my side, have been following what is happening coming out from Glasgow, and just the open science activities over there. It just blows my mind every time. Teaching R and everything about reproducibility, registry reports. I really wish I had this kind of supportive environment at HKN in Hong Kong. I try to do what I can to promote that, but it's quite rare for me to be able to talk to people who are knowledgeable about these topics and actually engage in those. So I'll kind of run through a few of these things, assuming that people know stuff about what's happening in the field and science and beyond. And we'll go through the slides, so you'll have a chance to see the slides, but then I will stop and emphasize certain aspects of these things in the slides. And in the spirit of open science, slides are shared, and hopefully we'll share all the recordings afterwards, both on YouTube and the open science framework. So this is what I started with when I gave a talk. I can't remember exactly where, but somewhere in Europe. And I want you to just try and consider what your answers are to these questions. So in an ideal world, what percentage of all articles that are published should be replications? And let's say that we take a Journal of Experimental Social Psychology, which is kind of like my field, and is considered, although it's a for-profit publisher, it's considered to be supportive of open science practices, doing registry reports and disclosures and all of that. So what is your expectations that a journal like that, what's the publication ratio for a replication? So keep that number in mind, and I'll show you what the results were from that workshop. So people thought that in an ideal world, I'm not really sure why and how they came to this. We had a little bit of a discussion, but they thought that in top tier journals, it should be something like 32%, and in average, whatever average is, it needs to be somewhere like 38.5. And they assumed that right now, JSP, Journal of Experimental Social Psychology, in terms of published articles, is about 10%, and about submissions, it's about 30%. It would be interesting to do a study on why people think that is and how. But my main point showing you this is I want you to think about what you had in mind, what these folks in that workshop thought it should be, and then my main argument to try and show you some evidence about the fact that we just don't do replications. We definitely don't publish replications. We don't submit replications, but we generally don't do enough replications because there's a strong bias against doing, submitting, publishing, and I experience this on a almost daily basis. So I tweeted to try and see what do people know about the ratio of publications and novel research. And you can see my summary from all the replies that I got. I think the most interesting reply was, the most recent one is from Simin Vazir, who used to be the editor of SPPS, now he's the editor of Collabra Psychology, who is mapping out the literature in psychology. So from about 85,000 articles that she mapped out, about 169 of those are replications. And then, well, you'll see how many replications we did and published. You can understand that this is even lower than that. But it's not just in psychology, in social psychology. It's around many fields, educational, language, economics. It's like we have a big problem. So somewhere around the 1% is very different than our ideal world of, for whatever reason, 30-something percent and what we expect. If we look at some of these findings, 2012 is the one that I know in regards to psychology. What's nice about this is that you can see a graph of just the exponential growth of the number of articles in psychology, but then the growth of actual replication rate is not going as strong. Plus, another interesting thing about this is that I really like this quote: as a field, we need to decide what is a good enough replication rate. So how many of replications do we want in our field? And it seems like right now we're far below what it is that most of us, regardless of open science or not, think that we should do as a field. And they also offered this rule of thumb that they thought that if a publication is cited more than 100 times, then it would be strange if there's no attempt at a replication. And I tend to agree with this. I don't know why 100, like we can discuss this kind of thing, but I think it's just strange that we have publications out there and we do TED Talks on those and we do books on those and we just communicate this to our students and practitioners without ever verifying this. Some of those from the 1970s and 80s, and we just take it for granted that they replicate. Similar things in education by the same researchers. So you can see the trend is very similar and somewhere about 0.2%. So ridiculous, really. Plus, in our field, social psychology, you can see some tweets that I got from Roger, who was the previous editor of Journal of Experimental Social Psychology. And you can see that in 670 submissions in the year 2019, only 12 of those were submissions that had anything regarding replications, which is a real shame, considering especially that 6 of those were from our team. So it's like 6 out of 670. And these are just submissions. The publication rate is worse. And in JSP, our replication rate of our submissions is lower than 50% with all sorts of problems. And it's not just Journal of Experimental Social Psychology, but also JPSP, which is like on par, and some people consider to be an A+ in our field in social psychology, judgment decision making. So compare this to what we thought or what the workshop folks thought is really happening in JSP. There's a real gap. Something is really off. 2020 was not much better than this. If anything, it went down. My conclusion from this: no one is doing replications or submitting replications. Definitely nobody is publishing this. So if the editor of Journal of Experimental Social Psychology is saying time for change, let's reflect on this, we need more replications, but nobody is actually responding to this call, aside from maybe the people that I engage with on doing replications, then we really need to think. We've had a decade to think about this, but we haven't been doing enough in order to try and catch up. This is a classic slide that I think many of you know if you are affiliated or have done anything with registered reports. So it's from Monafo, and Chris Chambers uses that a lot. And this is the first time I think that I saw this 1 in 1,000 is the replication rate from the article that I just showed you. But it's not that this is the only thing that's a problem. We have so many other problems around the research life cycle that we need to address. And only these mass replication efforts that came out, the science paper in 2015, and then many labs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the attempts to replicate stuff in Science and Nature, only those get a lot of traction and then responding to this. But generally, aside from these big ones, rarely do I see any reference to replications. Definitely not in the books, in the TED Talks, and the places where this matters. So aside from the open science community talking about these, we don't really see much about replications unless there's something very scandalous about it. My unofficial summary when I try to look at replication rates, and I've been following this for quite some time, is that in social psychology, generally, the replication rate is between 30 to 50%. And these are replications of our findings in what we consider to be our most reputable top journals. And in the things that replicate, the effect size is about half of that. It's not just a problem in psychology. So we understand now from cancer biology that was published 2021 that we have a real problem. It's not just replications. We have a problem with reproduction, getting the materials. And when we're talking about social psychology, perhaps not much harm done. Like we need to try and assess what the harm is if something doesn't replicate. But seriously, cancer biology, if something doesn't replicate over there, it's like people are, they die. There's real harm, there's suffering. So we need to take this into consideration. And these summaries are just mind-blowing. So 5 out of 50 out of 193, it's just not something that we can live with. And not being able to reproduce is unacceptable because we really need to be able to at least see what it is that they've done and be able to repeat this. And it's across fields in many other domains, economics, chemical research, and so forth. And every talk that I give usually starts with this kind of slide about we have some issues. This is all to say that somewhere in my postdoc 2016-17, I was in the Netherlands and realized that I feel like I need to do whatever it is that I can. And when I approach a tenure track academic career, I feel like I really need to realign everything. So I decided to take everything that I've done up until that point and put this aside, and had a year, just took a year to try and sit down with myself and think, what is it that I care about? What do I want my academic career to look like? And I have to say that I was trained in a business school in a management department. The practices that I've seen over there were very bad. And only in 2015-16, I just realized that much of what I've been trained on is just bad research practices that lead to all sorts of problems in the literature. So these are the things that I decided to emphasize. Obviously, open science, full transparency is key, not just about materials, data, code, but also about the entire process and all the things about exclusions. But the key aspect was that I really feel like we need a community effort. And I was seeking out this community. Luckily, I was in Maastricht in the Netherlands, so an hour away was Daniel Akens, and 2 hours away was University of Amsterdam and Tilburg. So lots of good people who I was able to learn from. And little, point by point, I added items that I thought were interesting. So heard about Chris Chambers' registered reports. So I said, okay, I need to understand what this is. But before that, I even need to understand what is pre-registration. What are all these things? I didn't know how to do a power analysis. I didn't even have a good grasp of what is an effect size. Preprints just started to kind of like open science framework with all these preprint servers. So I really had to map out and understand what is going on. So I just put down items that I wanted to try and tackle. So I'll give you just a little bit brief case studies from my own experience, and I would tie this to replications and extension. This is the first ever replication that I did. So I decided in my postdoc, I got some master students, and I announced, and my department was very puzzled by this. I said, I will only work on either pre-registered replications or pre-registered meta-analysis, not even knowing what is a pre-registration. It was that bad. And the first thing that I did is that I took the simplest study that I could think of, which is Kahneman and Miller exceptionality effect. It's a vignette study with a very slight manipulation of this. So you have two actors in version A. They frequent store A, and then in version A, they actually visit store A, and they were robbed. Something happened to them, and they got hurt by a gunshot wound. And the questions had to do with how much do they regret going to that store. And then the second version, so it's a between design, is that they frequent store A, but then they went to store B. So this is an exceptional behavior. So that is exceptionality. Lucas was a very brave soul, Lucas Kutcher, who was a master's student and decided to join me on this. And what was interesting about this whole thing is that we decided to take two targets. So we had three different scenarios: hitchhiker, car accident, and robbery. So already we wanted to see if there's an alignment between these three scenarios. Are they going to have the same kind of thing? And what Lucas very early on said is that the hitchhiker and car accident scenario pivoted, contrasted the exceptionality versus routine about regret DV. But somehow in a follow-up by Miller and McFarland, they changed the DV from regret to compensation. So Lucas told me, but I don't know how compensation is related to exceptionality effect, and it seems like they deviated. Is it okay if I also add a DV about actually measuring regret, which is closer to the theory? And then I said, yes, wonderful. Let's also run both compensation. And as an extension, let's also run regret. Back then, I didn't even understand exactly what that meant and what the implications were, but I just want to show you that now in my classes, this is the way that I teach this to students. So in class, I explain what the experiment is, and then I ask them to put this in tables. I've tried different types of tables, but this seems like the one that students understand the best. So we have the two between subject design, and then we have the DVs on the bottom, trying to articulate very briefly in a table what the experimental design looks like. Then as an extra step, I asked them, okay, so now that you know that we have this experimental design, let's think of extensions. A bit like Lucas said, perhaps it's not compensation, it should be regret instead of compensation. So you can add one of three types of extensions. Either before, you can add an individual difference scale that has nothing to do with manipulation. So this is supposed to be a stable trait of sorts, or something that differentiates people regardless of that sort of thing. And then you can look at an interaction using an ANCOVA or some method that would look at the combination of a trait scale and manipulation. Another option is adding another condition. So you have exceptionality versus routine, but perhaps you can change very slightly one of these conditions and add this as a third condition, or you can add a dependent variable. And I thought that this kind of categories are generally very easy for students to understand and follow up in classroom. So we have some wonderful things that come out of that. So what I asked them is, after we've written down the experimental method, it's like add either individual differences or another condition, third condition, or add a DV on top of that. And I think just the table structure helps make this clear. So this is an example over here. So individual differences, because we're talking about exceptionality, taking action, not taking action, changing something, not changing something, you can add something like an action state orientation scale. Some person said perhaps exception, but no control over change. So it's not that they deviated because they wanted a change of pace, but because the store was closed, this is why they changed. And then instead of just having regret, also having a compensation. So this just helps structure everything very clearly. So going back to the first replication that I ever ran, a pre-registered replication and extension, the result was this. The result was that the first one, using the regret DV, according to the norm theory, actually replicated successfully. But the one where we used, in the robbery scenario, we used the compensation DV, did not replicate. And I think generally, if you would try and submit this kind of thing to a journal, supposing that they care about replications, they would assume that something went wrong. But what was nice is that what Lucas actually added, the additional measure of regret, did actually replicate. So we were able to show that actually the original using the compensation DV didn't work very well, but our extension worked, and therefore we have additional insights. Lucas also added other things. We added measurements of social norms. So what are other people saying, negative affect and perceived luck, how lucky this person is. So we were able, on top of that classic, to also take this into new directions, plus adjust and correct something that doesn't work as well from the 1980s. And what is remarkable about this is that afterwards, we actually contacted the original authors and we said, something very strange happened. When we ran the original DV with compensation, it didn't work out. But when we ran this with regret, it did. And the reply that we got was, Yes, that's true. We also ran the same thing, but compensation didn't work out very well, but regret really did. But when we submitted this to the journals, they said there's no contribution. So I'm like, I'm very confused by this because the journal would want to correct this kind of thing. And if you as the original authors have this kind of knowledge, why does it take 40 years until we come in, master's students, in order to, like, these insights should be in the literature. One of the things that Lucas asked me at the beginning in 2017 is like, is anybody going to care about this in the community? And I said, I really don't know. Let's ask the community if they care about this or not. So before we did anything, just in the planning stage, I asked Lucas to go on ResearchGate and post this. So the aim of the project is to conduct a pre-registered application and a pre-registered meta-analysis. And to my great surprise, I never saw this coming. About a month later, Sander Kuhl, who was the incoming editor of Cognition and Emotion, wrote this to Lucas, responding to Lucas saying, you know, at Cognition and Emotion, where I am an incoming editor, we're seeking to publish more pre-registered research. And Lucas was very happy about this. You know, somebody is actually cares about this. So we're going to have a publication. And I'm like, wait, you know, there's a long way to go. We don't know how this is going to go, have the review process. I've never seen really replications of this this kind of easy target really published anywhere, so I didn't know. But Lucas made this happen. So we did submit this to Cognition Emotion, and it fairly easily. And the editor was, you know, an open science supportive. The reviews were positive. And this got me thinking, it's like, okay, so people are interested in replications. There is a way to publish these. And incoming editors are even going on my students' ResearchGate profiles and asking for this. And he didn't just do this with Lucas, he did this also with Yajin and Tijen. I'm like, what is going on over here? So perhaps just people are not doing replications and there's a hunger for more of that happening. Just to complement this, I just want to say that Lucas also did meta-analysis. And indeed, when we did a pre-registered meta-analysis, we saw that there's a big difference in the effect size between regret and compensation. So on one side, we had the pre-registered replication. On the other side, we had the meta-analysis. And together, they had complementary insights that helped progress the literature to understand that if you study compensation, you need much bigger samples in order to detect the effect. You can see the number of studies is not very high, so we do need more studies, but generally, effect size is almost like half when you use these different measures, so you need to take this into account, and somebody needs to say this about the literature. Just to summarize, what are some of the things about replications that make them so valuable? It's, first of all, we verify things. We do a reanalysis of the reported statistics. We are able to conduct a power analysis based on what it is that we calculate from that. Sometimes we find mistakes, and never happen to us, but some others find fraud sometimes. There's something about reproducibility. So perhaps the findings, the materials from the 1980s are no longer available, but now because of our replication, anybody can take that Qualtrics and use that and has everything laid out. If something replicates, then it increases our confidence in the results. If it doesn't replicate, then we should adjust our prior to know that perhaps we should expect less or more noise in that. And then we get a slightly better estimation, an updated estimation of the effect size. Plus, as you've seen, we can improve all sorts of things. We can make sure that the DV is aligned with theory. So why change from regret to compensation? Compensation includes a lot of other different things about accountability and morality, and not just about affect. It tests generalizability. So the original studies were done with a student sample, and now we've done this on cloud research, Amazon Mechanical Turk. So there's all of that. Some people say, but replications are not very good for theory. So here you can see that actually the pre-registered replication informed something about us following up with a meta-analysis and actually seeing that there is something about the differences between regret and compensation. So replications also help with updating theory, testing theory better. And plus, it really ignites lost interest. So perhaps that specific study had a large number of citations, but not so much in recent years. And having a replication like this, updating things, really helps especially if you have validated insights, verified insights. Generally, I think some of you perhaps are familiar with this, but we have a kind of like a scale of replications, from exact replication, where most of the things are the same, to from direct to a conceptual replication. And most of the things that we do are somewhere in between, very close to close replication, where some of the things are the same, but it could be that we're changing the IV or the DV, the stimuli, or perhaps we're changing something about the procedure or the physical setting. Of course, the context is different, the time is different, and all of that, but this still constitutes a direct replication, which I have come to think is more valuable in gaining some insight than just a conceptual replication. I'll talk a little bit about that. Another very brief case study, 2019, I attended the SIPS. I think I met some of you over there in some of the sessions. And then people from Sweden said, you're already in Europe, so do you want to come over to help us with our judgment decision-making replications? And I said, yeah, I would love to. So if you're interested, please do invite me. I love visiting. Here's what I suggested. I suggested, instead of just me giving a talk, how about we do this like a hands-on replication workshop? So in 3 days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I said, we're going to complete a replication and extension of a classic study. A little bit ambitious. I've never done this in 3 days, but I thought it would be interesting to try this out with that team over there. And the basic idea was, once again, going to take a very simple study where the materials are already available, run this very fast online. Because it's a very simple vignette study with no potential harm, then it's very quick to get this through IRB, and a simple methodology. And we chose, I suggested this target, the simplest target that I could ever find. I thought this was to the point of almost being ridiculous, but this is a classic from the 1980s about we all are less risky and more skillful drivers than others. So when people compare themselves to others, so it's above average effect, we think that we're just better drivers, we take less risks and all that. It's a classic effect in judgment decision making, but it seems like it doesn't always work. It works on some contexts. Plus, it was done in the 1980s, perhaps 30, 40 years later, things are different. So you can see, actually, this is pretty much the entire article. The article is very short. It's like a one-page article where it was even like descriptive. There was no statistics in there. They just reported what it is that they found in a distribution. And people were saying, like, the initial reaction is like, come on, really, seriously, nobody cares about a paper that is this simple. But if you look at the number of citations, it really, people care. So it has 2,600 citations. I think if you check now, it probably is like 1,000 more or something, because people have studied above average effect many times. And every time they do this, they cite this article. So it's important for us to know whether this replicates or not. And here you can see some of the findings. So you can see actually the effects are very large. We actually don't get a lot of these kinds of effects in judgment decision making. So the Hedges G, or if you're familiar with Cohen's D, so it's Cohen's D with some sample size adjustment. You can see that our effects are above 1, which is very, very unusual. Plus, some people argue, why do you focus on replications? We should focus on things like measurement. And my point is like, yes, we should definitely care about measurement, and replications can help with this. So for example, when we looked at their DV, we looked at their how they measure this, and we thought this is a bit odd. So from 0 to 10, so these are 11, and then 41 to 50, these are 10. So the way that they distributed the options seemed a bit weird to us. So we actually tested 2 more in a between subject design. So we tested the original, but we also tested this with a midpoint. So doing this equal on the left and equal on the right, and then a midpoint. And then we also just introduced a Likert scale in order to see how that differentiates. And you can see that actually with the Likert scale, the effect size is lower than in the original scale. And if you do this adjusted with a midpoint, it's slightly higher in some of the measurements. So generally you can try and improve on some of the flaws that you see in the original study. Plus, we know how to do things better. Since the 1980s, we have new methods. So we concluded this within 3 days, and it was wonderful to just like sit down and work with them. And the question at the end was, is this publishable? Can we publish something as simple as this with a 3-day workshop? And the answer is yes, definitely. Meta psychology is very open to replications. We could have tried something different, but we love how open meta psychology is. How open is it? It publishes all the peer review. Everything is shared on the Open Science Framework and has badges, and it's on the top factors. This has some of the highest top factor rankings about reproducibility, openness, transparency. So we love meta psychology, and of course it's a diamond open access, so there are no fees, and it's by the community for the community. You can see that the general model that we have, at least for this submission, is that all the students are acknowledged, plus the teaching assistants are acknowledged, with the lead author in the top and me trailing at the end over there. So what have we learned from this whole thing? If you want to at least try and get your hands dirty with replications and extensions, you could, I suggest, start from something super simple but impactful in the literature. See how you can add some things, extensions that might be, exploratory, but you can gain some insights from that. Practice a little bit with what it means to do pre-registrations. So my pre-registrations now are so much better than what I did in 2017. I gained a lot of insights and developed some templates. And from every interaction and every time I work with students, I improve this based on their questions. So we improve every semester. And by now we have quite comprehensive pre-registrations and templates and examples. Yeah, try to step-by-step do more materials, data code publicly, preprint, and then do try some of these open science supportive journals. You can go for Journal of Experimental Social Psychology, but then some hostile reactions and sometimes, 30%, 40% acceptance rate. But if you go to journals like Meta Psychology, there's a good chance that you'll get some constructive, positive feedback that really helps you to improve. And I think the biggest insight for me is like, you can do this with students. You can do this with early career researchers. It's just the right way for us to work with them and for us to learn by working with them. So the obvious advantages of running replications, not just replications, but replications and extensions, is you lower the risk and the higher credibility because you use something that is already tested. You don't have to start everything from scratch and gamble, am I doing this correctly or not? Just like go over the literature, see what they've done, learn from that, implement this. Less effort also for you and lower costs because everything is already out there and available. It's much clearer and easier to measure because you know exactly what somebody replicated from the literature and what somebody added. So you know exactly where the contribution is. You don't have people guessing, wait, what is the link to the literature? What is the novel contribution? If you do replication extension, you know exactly where the extension is and what the insights are compared to what the literature is saying. Plus, there's a lot more value in this because these are impactful classics. And then if you find something that doesn't work, then that helps the community. If you validate them and verify them, that also helps. So win-win, regardless of whether something fails or replicates well. And then there's a lot of learning to do from this. So if you do everything that is novel research, you have a lot of chances of failing, and then you won't know why. But if you do replications and extensions, you know exactly which part failed and what it is that you need to adjust based on this. So if both of them fail, then you know it's not because of your extension, it's because the replication, the foundations are not solid enough. If the replication succeeds but your extension fails, then you know, okay, perhaps I need a different extension. Test this differently, but at least I know that my foundations are solid. If the extension succeeds, like in our case, but the replication failed, then you really need to rethink the current knowledge, perhaps run a meta-analysis, put this as a moderator, understand some of the differences between the replication and the extension. And if both of them succeeded, it's a win-win because you validated what is out there, and then you added something of your own to drive the literature forward. So this I feel like is the right direction. So this is kind of like the background of replications and extensions. Very briefly about what it is that I do with the team, the students, and the early career researchers. So once I had these Lucas in Maastricht University and some other experiences, when I joined Hong Kong University, I wanted to scale this up, and I decided I want to do as many of these as possible. And if there's interest in that coming from cognition and emotion, then we can really implement this throughout the courses as much as possible. And I wanted to join this open science, meta science, collaborative science with all my teaching and mentoring. So rather than going through books that have a lot of findings that I don't know if they replicate or not replicate, I just want to invite the students to try out things with me in the classroom so that we can figure things out together. I don't have any special insight because right now I feel like we need to reassess and validate everything. So I decided we need to focus on students and early career researchers. I want to do a lot of replications and extensions, focusing on the classics that are in all our books and going systematically step by step, optimizing every semester. So not starting from, nothing to everything, but every semester try something new, one more thing that is new. And then if that works, successful proof of concept, then I implement this further. So it's kind of like a scalable model. And if I'm able to do a lot of these together, and we've completed quite a few of those, then at the end, we can also gain some meta-analytic insights. This is our team. You can see a lot of lead authors from various places around the world, and then quite a few guided thesis students, but it's all based on these 360 something students in my courses throughout the years. How many did we do so far? So in the 4 years, we've conducted about 80 pre-registered replications and extensions, about 40 registered report stage 1 studies, about 3 pre-registered meta-analysis, a few more registered reports. And we also ran, because we have so many of those, we ran prediction markets and trying to get some insights from top level, looking down at what's happening to try and map out sort of things. But I think perhaps the biggest contribution that we've had is these collaborative guides and templates where anybody from any place in the world can just come in, take what it is that we've done, and implement this model successfully in their own places. So now we have teams in various places in the world. For example, Brazil, I think, is the most advanced, where they're taking everything that we've done, running this with their students. They don't need to rewrite anything. They just translate this to Portuguese, and then they run this on Brazilian samples. And now we can suddenly also see cross-cultural differences. We can see all sorts of meta-analytic insights combining different replications in various parts of the world. We've mapped out quite a few of those. And interestingly, our success rate, at least for my very non-random sample of the classics, is that the replication rate is higher for us than it normally is in social psychology based on what it is that I keep track of. So we're about 70% success rate. But I think the big takeaway from this for me is not just the judgment decision making literature is perhaps more replicable than others, but that students and undergraduate students in a place like Hong Kong, working with a first year, second year assistant professor who's a nobody, are able to run this mass scale and get to a very high success rate of replications. But also in the things that we weren't able to replicate, that were mixed or inconclusive or unsuccessful, because we ran replications and extensions, students were able to identify a lot of things, insights for the literature on how to move forward. Sometimes we found mistakes. Sometimes we found a DV doesn't work as expected, but something else does work. Sometimes we ran things within design or between design, and then we saw that there's a difference between these two. So it's amazing. It's a very humbling experience to work with students and see how well they've done and all the insights that we can gain from this. So it's really like an integration of, for me, an ideal integration of education, research, and community. A little bit very quickly about the methodology. I don't like the way that I've been trained in the university, where a professor stands in front of the class and says, the truth is, I don't know, ego depletion or power posing based on the book. I prefer the this more scientist mindset, humble way of teaching, where we teach students to question knowledge, to figure things out together with us, and understanding that confusion is natural and uncertainty is natural and science is messy. And they need to know this. They don't need to get these clean messages that everything works and everything is perfect, and invite them to inform science together. So moving into a problem-based learning where I present them with the problem. Does this replicate or not? Go figure this out. Let's work on this together. And I sit in the back. I guide them. I mentor. I tell them, this is a resource. This is my advice. But practically, during the semester, they do everything pretty much by themselves with our guidance. So it's very student focused. So student led, potential of real impact, doing actual science and experiencing everything in the scientific process. So typically we have two teams working independently, and then they peer review each other, and then we get peer review from Twitter and the community. So no more of instructor truth, or this is the book accepted as the as an authority, but rather learn to question things and test things out for yourself. If you want to see how I implement things in the spirit of open science, everything is shared. So you can go and take all my materials, all the lectures are available. Because of the pandemic, we do Zoom and hybrid. So I just decided I'm gonna share everything. So if you want to see how it's been done hands-on in the classroom, then you can just take whatever it is that I've done and use this in your own classes. A bit about the collaborative resources. So everything that I do, including with the students, is Google Docs, and all of them are publicly open. Anybody can come in and comment and add things. And if you join us on any of those, if you've contributed anything and you've added your name and told us what the contribution is, when we submit this to the journal, it is you're a co-author. It's a co-authored manuscript. So a good way for you to both gain something and contribute something back and then get some credit for it. So we've done a bunch of those. How to do a replication extension, there's a guide for that. The R community, so we keep track of all your accomplishments and we add those guides in there, so you can go and see all the links that we have, how to calculate effect size, how to do a power analysis, what are the best practices in statistics, how to do Qualtrics, just a bunch of those. Plus, if you want to see examples from what the students have actually done, both replications and extensions and assessments, everything is open and shared, so you can just go and browse that. And students just blow my mind in the quality of what it is that they're able to achieve if you just set the right path for them. So we had two different themes. One is a register report and the other is with data collection. And you can see a little bit of the model here of how it's done. At the end of the semester, we have a completed manuscript, APA manuscript, that is supposedly ready for submission, but we don't submit this yet. This is where we invite you. So if you're an early career researcher and you want to join us, you can take what it is that we've completed already. If you feel more comfortable with having something that already has data collection, then you can go we have, I think, about 40 that are completed already that you can choose with data collection. Or if you prefer to join the more recent attempts to do everything as a registered report, you can take some of these submissions over here. So you join me, the students are already not involved, but you take what it is that they've done, you verify this, you add some things, if you want to add analysis or add something in the introduction or the discussion, then you're very welcome to it. And then together with me, I will guide you. I will make sure that everything is clear. We have a team that supports you. So you're the lead author, and you get credit for that. And I'll show you in a second what that looks like. Starting from last year, everything that we do as a thesis is submitted as a registered report through the peer community in registered reports. And the revolutionary thing about this is that they do peer review within two weeks, which is what enables me to do this in a 1-year thesis work. So you can see a very similar model to what happens with the students only over an academic year and with external peer review that comes from the community, leading to an in-principle acceptance before we do the data collection. What does that look like in terms of impact? So you can see all the students are recognized. So these are the underlined ones. and then followed by the teaching assistants, and then me finally trailing at the back. And the early career researcher who joins us is the first author, and the first author, early career researcher, and the students are shared first author in STAR. So everybody gets credit for this. Plus, we have the contributorship, where we say each person, this is what it is that they contributed, and this is what they added to the submission. So everything is open and transparent. And it's just nice to see that we were able to get this into some of the reputable journals in the field. So having quite the impact. So it's nice to see that some of these early career researchers also got promoted, got into the job market, got postdocs. So it helps them to have this kind of thing also in 2022. So it's going pretty well. The thing that I'm very proud of is that we've submitted about 18 or 19 already, I think, peer community investigative reports, and have in principle acceptance for most of those, all of my students. So it's amazing to see the students take part in this revolution, and on one side contributing to science and doing some amazing things in promoting an initiative like peer community and registered report. On the other side, it also helps them both in industry and academia when they continue to their next stage. So altogether, we're having some kind of an impact, showing that this is possible. Lots of testimonials. You can go and listen to the students talk about this on YouTube, or we have Psychology Today. Lots of information for you if you want to know more. So you're very welcome to take everything that we do, run your own. If you need some support from me, I'm happy to do that. If you want to take the Brazilian model of translating this to a different language, wherever it is that you're from, or collaborators that you have in various other places, terrific. And you're welcome to join us. We have a very detailed Google Doc that says everything about how the collaboration works and what are the expectations, what I contribute, what's expected of you. So many options for you to be part of this team, or leverage what it is that we've already done in your own research and your teaching. Everything that I presented is on this website about the core team. You can go and have a look, learn about all of that. We have a mailing list that every 2 months gives updates about all the preprints, the publications, the talks, everything else that the students do throughout the semester. So you can subscribe to that. And if you want something more like one-on-one, you have some questions, me and the team behind me are very eager to help you in your open science journey doing replications and extensions. So do reach out and let me know how I can help. So that's it for now. I'm happy to take your questions.